seen what I grew up in and where I got most of my knowledge from really is this guy right here.
On a quiet summer day in 2020, a man stepped out for what should have been a routine walk and seemingly vanished without a trace. No phone calls, no digital footprint, no confirmed sightings after that moment. Paul Cox lived a life so private that when he disappeared, it took months before alarms truly rang. But once they did, whispers started spreading, rumors that something far darker may have happened. Was this a voluntary escape, a tragic accident, or something far more sinister? The deeper you look into this case, the more unsettling it becomes. Because some mysteries don't just hide answers, they erase them entirely. Most disappearances begin with something unusual. A late-night phone call, a sudden argument, a broken routine. But Paul Cox's story starts with something almost painfully ordinary. On June 1st, 2020, the 62-year-old reportedly left near his daughter's apartment in Rockwood, Tennessee, stepping outside for what appeared to be a simple walk. There was no sign he planned to travel, no packed bag, no goodbye. He just walked away and never made it back. At first glance, nothing about that day screamed danger. People take walks all the time, especially in quieter Tennessee towns where life tends to move at a slower pace. But hours turned into a full night, and that night eventually turned into days without a confirmed sighting. No neighbors came forward saying they saw where he went. No nearby businesses reported spotting him. It was as if the moment he stepped out of view, the trail simply stopped. Tracking someone usually means following the digital crumbs they leave behind: a credit card swipe, a phone ping, a social media login. But in Paul Cox's case, investigators didn't just face a missing person. They faced the absence of a modern trail entirely. Paul reportedly lived a deeply private, almost off-grid lifestyle. He didn't use a cell phone, had no known internet presence, and didn't even own a vehicle. In a world where most people generate hundreds of data points a day, Paul left almost none. At first, that might sound peaceful, even admirable to some. But when someone like that disappears, the search becomes dramatically harder. There are no GPS records to retrace his steps, no last text message to timestamp his movements, and no transaction history to map out where he might have gone. Investigators can't rewind his day through technology because, for Paul, technology barely existed. His personality reportedly matched that lifestyle. He was described as independent, someone comfortable with solitude and not known for constant communication. That detail matters because it means his silence may not have immediately raised panic. A man who values privacy can go unnoticed longer than someone who checks in daily. And that delay can quietly shrink the chances of finding clear evidence. But his off-grid life raises an unsettling question. Did it give him freedom? Or did it make him the perfect person to disappear without witnesses? Because when there's no trail to follow, even the smallest mystery suddenly becomes much bigger. And the timeline only makes that mystery harder to ignore. In missing person cases, the clock is everything. The first 24 to 48 hours are often called the window when clues are freshest, memories are sharp, and the chances of finding someone are at their highest. But in Paul Cox's disappearance, that window may have quietly closed before the search ever truly began. Reports indicate he wasn't officially reported missing until months after he was last seen, often cited as October 2020, a gap that immediately raises eyebrows. Now, delays aren't always suspicious. When someone is known to live independently and keep to themselves, it's not unusual for days or even weeks to pass without contact. Friends and family might assume the person is simply off the grid for a while. But months? That's where the timeline begins to feel less like a delay and more like a void. By the time concern escalated, potential surveillance footage would likely have been erased, physical traces exposed to weather, and witnesses left relying on fading memory rather than fresh detail. Even the smallest lead in someone recalling a man walking down a road becomes harder to verify as time stretches on. And then there's the psychological weight of that gap. People naturally start asking questions. Who last spoke to him? When did someone first realize something wasn't right? Could something critical have been missed in those early days? Because once time slips away in a case like this, it rarely gives anything back. But what truly unsettled the community wasn't just the missing time. It was what people began whispering afterward. Small towns have a way of generating quiet conversations that rarely stay quiet for long. As concern over Paul Cox grew, so did the speculation, the kind that spreads in fragments, passed from one person to another until no one can quite trace where it began. Among the most unsettling claims reported in local coverage were whispers that Paul may have been harmed, with talk suggesting he had possibly been shot. To be clear, these were described as rumors and hearsay, not confirmed facts. But once an idea like that enters the public space, it changes how people see the entire case. Instead of asking whether Paul simply wandered off or suffered an accident, the narrative begins to tilt towards something more deliberate. People start replaying timelines in their heads, wondering who might have crossed paths with him that day. Did someone notice something unusual but dismiss it at the time? Did a seemingly normal interaction hide something darker underneath? Rumors can be dangerous. They blur the line between possibility and reality. Yet they also reveal something important. Those closest to the situation seem to feel that Paul's disappearance didn't add up. After all, vanishing without a trace is rare. Vanishing while leaving behind questions and uneasy instincts is rarer still. But speculation alone doesn't solve mysteries. If anything, it can pull attention in too many directions at once. And in Paul's case, just as the whispers grew louder, another complication surfaced, one that made the search even harder to piece together. One detail that quietly complicates Paul Cox's disappearance is the geography itself. He was reportedly last seen in Rockwood, Tennessee, yet some accounts tie him to an area near Smith Mountain Road in neighboring Cumberland County. On paper, that might not seem like a major issue. Towns blend into each other, county lines are invisible to the eye, but in a missing person case, location is everything. Even a few miles can completely shift where investigators focus their attention. Rural Tennessee is known for its dense woods, uneven terrain, and long stretches of road where you can travel without seeing another person for quite some time. It's the kind of landscape that offers both peace and isolation, sobbing. Beautiful but unforgiving if something goes wrong. If Paul set out on foot, the environment alone could create countless blind spots. A person could leave the road for just a moment and become nearly impossible to spot from a distance. Jurisdiction can also add subtle layers of difficulty. When multiple areas are connected to a timeline, tips may come in scattered, with witnesses unsure which agency to call or whether what they noticed even matters. Meanwhile, search efforts risk being spread thin rather than concentrated where the strongest clues might be hiding. And then there's the unsettling reality. The more ground there is to cover, the easier it becomes for answers to stay buried. But the terrain is only part of the puzzle, because once you step back and examine the possibilities, the theories surrounding Paul's disappearance grow even more puzzling. When a person disappears without a trace, the human mind naturally tries to fill in the blanks. In Paul Cox's case, 3 possibilities tend to surface again and again, and each one carries its own unsettling implications. The first is voluntary disappearance. Some wonder if Paul simply chose to walk away from his life. His private, off-grid habits might seem to support that idea at first glance. A man without a phone or heavy digital presence could, in theory, slip into a new environment more easily than most. But that theory quickly runs into friction. Leaving intentionally usually involves preparation, gathering supplies, arranging transportation, or quietly setting up a next step. There has been no widely reported evidence suggesting he planned any kind of departure. Then there's the possibility of an accident. The surrounding region is filled with thick forest, steep slopes, and areas that can become dangerous faster than expected. One wrong step, a sudden medical sudden emergency, or even disorientation could turn a short walk into a life-threatening situation. Searches in rugged terrain are notoriously difficult, especially when time has already passed. The third and most troubling possibility is that someone else was involved. With rumors already circulating and the timeline clouded by delay, it's a scenario people can't help but consider. Still, without publicly confirmed evidence, it remains only a theory. And that's what makes this case so haunting. Every explanation feels possible, yet none of them fully explain how a man could simply vanish. Years have passed since Paul Cox stepped out for that walk, yet the case remains publicly described as unsolved. No confirmed sightings have brought relief, no major breakthrough has shifted the narrative, and no clear explanation has surfaced to quiet the growing sense of unease. For the people who still think about this disappearance, time hasn't provided closure. It's only deepened the mystery. Cases like this don't stay frozen, they evolve slowly in the background. Investigators often rely on something deceptively simple: memory. One overlooked detail, one person suddenly recalling where they were that day, or one conversation that didn't seem important at the time could still matter. It's not uncommon for someone to hold on to information for years before realizing its significance. Sometimes all it takes is a fresh set of eyes to connect pieces that once felt unrelated. What makes Paul's disappearance especially chilling is the lack of physical evidence publicly tied to his last movements. Without that anchor, the story becomes suspended between possibilities. Not resolved, just waiting. And waiting can be the hardest part for those hoping for answers. Because ultimately, mysteries like this don't just affect one missing person. They ripple outward, leaving communities unsettled and families searching for even the smallest sense of certainty. And perhaps the most unsettling thought of all is this: someone, somewhere, may know exactly what happened that day in Hanantonsoalagis and has simply never spoken up. Some mysteries fade with time, but others seem to grow heavier the longer they remain unsolved. Paul Cox didn't just disappear, he left behind a silence that no timeline has been able to explain. Was it a quiet decision, a tragic twist of fate, or something far more calculated? Without answers, every possibility lingers. What makes this case truly unsettling is the idea that the truth may not be lost, just hidden in a memory someone has never shared. Until that missing piece surfaces, Paul's story remains a reminder that people don't simply vanish, but sometimes explanations do.